The Price of a Favor by NKVD Open Up. The man walked alone down the wet cobblestone street that lined the city. There was a certain dampness in the air, and the city could feel electric at this time of night. The city itself being rather plain, had often gone through great building sprees in order to compete with nearby cities for tourists. What the city leadership made sure not to tell the tourists, however, was that the city lay near a great stagnant body of water, giving it a rather unpleasant aroma, not to mention the bountiful number of mosquitoes. Precisely because of those building sprees, the city had taken on a haphazard appearance. It had no sense of cohesion, save for the poorer districts that were unified only in being run down and containing the city's dregs. The man was wandering into the seedier parts of the city. Despite the fine clothes he found himself in nowadays, he found himself at home in the poorer districts. Perhaps they reminded him of a home he had nearly forgotten. Or perhaps they simply knew not to stare at strangers. Whatever the case, he found himself here again and again. He buttoned his dark brown overcoat as he walked and pulled down the rim of his matching bowler hat, doing his best to hide his eyes and perpetually boyish face. No matter where he went in the world, from the streets of Shanghai to the very streets he walked down now, his eyes always set him apart. He could never seem to fully hide how they glow a faintly tangerine tint, and yet he always tried. He loved to strut past the working girls. Their wares held no interest for him now, of course, but it was always good to make friends. Friends can come in handy, say when one needed an alibi, or perhaps to say that, no, Mr. Barrymore is much too nice to have anything to do with that. No strumpet could hold his interest now. He had only one need now, one desire that pressed down his neck, that made his hair stand on end, the desire that had him prowling the streets here in the dark rain. It was the hunger. The all-encompassing hunger was his only interest, his only love and desire. He knew his hunger would have to wait for now. A few too many false starts this past few nights had him feeling a spook. He would have to eat eventually, of course, but he simply couldn't risk leaving himself exposed. That would bring questions once he knew he held no answer to. I'll never find anyone worthwhile in this damn rain, he thought to himself. Better go see if I can find a familiar face. Walking onto Cranton streets, he could see Mary there under the faint street lights, standing on her favorite corner, her plain clothes seemingly out of place for her line of work. She was a pleasant woman, her personality not showing any of the wear and tear she wore so harshly on her face. "Hello, Mary," he said as he walked casually over.
"Hello, Mr. Barrymore. Finally ready to spend some cash?"
she said, smiling as she pulled her dark curls into a bun. He could see the lines on her face, and for a woman of 35, she appeared much older. He sometimes wondered whether it had been the kids or the lifestyle that had been the culprit. "Afraid not," he said in his best apologetic tone. "We'll fancy a chat if you're willing, of course."
"Chats don't pay the bills, Mr. Barrymore,"
she said, doing her best to light up a cigarette in the cold wetness.
Got bills to pay like everyone else, and I got not to say worth paying for. Don't get me wrong, I love to chat to a handsome man like you, but my heating bill is nearly overdue and
I'll be happy to oblige you. One night only, of course, he said to her, offering his lighter. I can make habit of paying for conversation. After all, what would people say?
they never believe that. Who pays us just to talk? Never heard of such a thing, but since it's you, I'll take a chance. Heard good things about you from Ashley.
Ah, Ashley. Lovely girl. Boring, but lovely. He said, friendly smile on display.
I got a room nearby.
Mary said.
You'll have to pay up front. I'll try to be less boring than Ashley, but no refunds either way. You'll have to pay up front at the desk.
Fair enough, he said. She began to walk in a stride, fast enough to surprise him. After all these years, it's still amazing just how fast a woman could be in heels when she needed to run. They eventually arrived at the place she had spoken of. It was somehow worse than he had thought. The cracked red brick exterior and poor lighting giving the place an altogether deteriorated and dingy look.
This is the place. Just give your money to the clerk and I'll take you to the room.
Mary told him flatly. He opened the door. It felt as if it may have fallen off the hinges if anyone was so inclined as to give it a hard pull. He walked over to the desk clerk. $20, the man stated blankly. Mr. Barrymore looked at the calendar behind the clerk. It read August 2nd, 1959. The year had seemingly passed by in the blink of an eye, and at his age they had a habit of bleeding together. He placed two neat crisp $10 bills on the counter, the clerk reaching forward to grasp them greedily. It occurred to him that in another century people might have run in horror from the clerk and his poxy-looking hands. He walked towards Mary, sparing one last look of disgust for the desk clerk. They walked together up the creaking stairs and through a dimly lit hallway. The cracking white paint on the walls having little been there, neglected since the 20s. What good times those had been, he thought to himself. Mary opened up the door to a surprisingly cozy room. Its foundations were as neglected as the rest of the place, but she had tried her best to give the place a woman's touch. It smelled of lavender and of spring, and the bed sheets were a lovely shade of grey. Her room facing nothing but a brick wall. She had made the best of it with matching curtains.
Well, have a seat on the chair or in the bed if you think you might change your mind.
Mary said politely. Not likely to change my mind, dear, said Mr. Barrymore. Have a thing about being touched. Dreadfully, really. It certainly limits my prospects.
Oh, well, I just stopped with Ashley and all.
Just a little street tease, he interrupted, sitting down on the bed. In truth, he had been interested to know whether those male parts of his still worked. It had turned out that it did, although it was not her shapely body that had done it. He had seen as she danced how the veins in her neck had fluttered and throbbed, how excited he had felt at that sight, how alive. He had watched Miss Ashley dance for him times before he came close to him. Oh, the scent she'd thrown into his nose, how he hungered for her. Yet, he remembered how she had suddenly recoiled from him when he realized that she had touched him. She had noticed, of course. Who wouldn't? He could sometimes hide his eyes. He could hide his hungry gaze and even his true attitude and beliefs, but not his touch. How cold he felt, how stiff. He, of course, apologized profusely, talking much about his skin condition and the terrible trouble it had given him with women. She understood. It made her understand how an attractive man like him had come to seek her company. Why he dressed always in long clothes, why he wasn't married. He had given her just enough to rationalize everything in her mind. She had even apologized to him. He knew how naive people could be.
Mr. Barrymore?
Mary's voice broke his silent contemplation.
You've gotten lost in your head, I think.
Sorry, my dear. I lost myself in wondering at my lot in life and where it leads me. I'll take the bed all the same. He smiled as earnestly as he knew how.
Well, I know that feeling all too well. Just look at where I am now, sitting in Rat House with a strange man. Not you, of course, Mr. Barrymore.
She stammered. Now, Mary, I like to think we've spoken enough to be comfortable around one another. I know I've never purchased your services before, but you know my real name. I've been out of the town with your friends. Certainly in your line of work that counts for something.
Perhaps,
she said, looking at her feet.
What is he wanted to talk about, Mr. Barrymore?
Please, call me Winston. You needn't be so formal with me. And there's nothing in particular I wish to discuss, simply to pick your mind for an hour. See, it's not often I get to have a real discussion with those around me. I have my business partners, of course, but friendship has been hard to come by, and love even more than that. My affliction has left me rather isolated, said Winston, doing his best to sound sorrowful.
Yes, Ashley mentioned it to me. We girls talk shop, you see. We don't have much choice, considering how violent some men can get.
Don't you have any protectors? Winston asked her. Someone to watch over you.
Well, there's Thomas, but some protection he is. He's as likely to beat as he is to help us,
Mary told him, tears threatening to fall. What about your family, Mary?
My husband died some years back, working at the factory. Then there's my parents. They asked me more than once to come home. I know my father's looking for me, but I can go back there. That'd be admitting defeat. They told me not to marry my George, you see, but I ran away to just that. Look where that led me.
She trailed off. So your parents miss you. That sounds like an advantage over some of the other girls you work with. From the little I know about many of them, they have no one, just one another. Winston knew things like that worked in his favor. An isolated group with little outside contact could be easy picking. But he had also learned that they could be turned to his advantage, alive and unharmed.
I guess you're right,
Mary told him.
I have to go home one of these days. I'm not getting any younger, and I'd like to stop by before my kids are old enough to figure out what I do.
What do you say to help you, Mary? Money is no issue, and besides, I like doing what I can for others. Winston sat up on the bed. I'll pay this month's bill, and then I'll set up contact with your father. You can meet him at my office. I'll say you've been working as my secretary. He doesn't have to know a thing.
I don't know.
Mary said, trying to not let her excitement show.
Why would you do things like that? Besides, what's the cost? Nothing in the world is free, and the price for all that must be high.
Oh, it's a simple matter, really. All you have to do is bring a person to meet me. That's all. You'll bring them and then leave.
Who?
Mary asked him.
More importantly, why? It can't be that easy. Not for that amount of kindness.
Oh, but it will be, my dear. In a few days' time, after I've paid your debts, I call on you. I will tell you the who and the where. You will bring them to me. After that, I'll give you enough money to make it downtown. I'll have a hotel set up for you and your children. I'll let you use my office telephone to call your father and tell him where to meet you. I'll even make a nameplate for the desk so that everything will look just perfect. As for the why, my dear, it's trivial, really. I like to have a conversation with this person, much like you and I are doing now. That's all there is to it, he said with a genial smile.
That is too good to be true. It can't be that easy, not for such a reward.
Mary says skeptically. Never look a gift horse in the mouth, dear. Take what's been offered and thank me if you wish, but even that's not necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Barrymore.
Please, my dear, call me Winston. Without thinking, Mary ran over and hugged Winston. As her arms wrapped around him, he could smell the salt in her tears. He could see the blood pump in her neck. Dum-dum. He pulled back slowly from her. He hoped she had not noticed the look on his face.
I'm so sorry, Winston. You did say you don't like being touched.
Mary told him. She hadn't seemed to notice the feel of his skin, nor had she paid any mind to how his chest never rose and fell. In that instance, she had only noticed her own happiness overwhelming her. The next few days seemed a blur. Winston was prepared for what came next. He had laid out every last detail as meticulously as he could. He had instructed Mary to not tell anyone about his kindness, lest every girl come around with a sob story and their hand out. She had understood, but still he had ensured she had followed his word. Knock, knock, knock. Mary answered the door wearing a bright summer dress. In his day, a simple peasant like her will never have had such finery, but this was the age of the machine, and those ideas were long dead. Hello again, Mary, he said with a smile. Now or never. He saw the nervous look that lay on her face, and so he reached out his hand for her to take, breaking his own rule about touch. This will set her a little more at ease. Mary swallowed.
Okay, I'm ready.
Against her better judgment, she went. He escorted her down to his waiting black Imperial. It was brand new and meant to impress. He opened the door for her. Wash your head, my dear. She sat and waited for Winston to enter the car. He walked around and got in, and for the first time she noticed his eyes. Frightened, she said nothing. Now that I've paid your debts, it's time for you to fulfill your end of the bargain. You'll find Thomas and you'll bring him to this address. He lay an address in her lap, hastily scrawled on a piece of paper. I don't care how you get him there, it's up to you. Once he enters the door, then my dear, we are even. I will hand you enough cash to get to my hotel, and you will leave. Ask no questions, and do not come back. I must stress this last point. I'll see you tomorrow night.
Thomas? My pimp Thomas?
Mary asked incredulously. Yes, dear. No more questions. Bring him to me and your troubles will be at an end. This I swear. He out his hand over his stilled heart. Mary got out and looked back once more at Winston. He knew she would do it. How could she not? Had he not shown her every kindness? Had he not been a perfect gentleman? She would do it. He had no doubts. The girl had been offered too much to stop now. He arrived at the house. He didn't know who owned the place, only that they hadn't been home for some time and they weren't likely to be anytime soon. It had a marvelous exterior, built in the colonial revival style and painted white. Someone had clearly put a lot of love into this home, and for all the majesty of the exterior, the interior was much better. The house had all the luxuries that one would expect of a mother home: television, radio, indoor plumbing, the works. None of it mattered to Winston in the slightest, yet he had chosen this home for those very reasons. He knew how disarming wealth could be. He sat in the artificial light, waiting as the hours passed. He began to doubt himself for the first time in this adventure, wondering if time had addled his senses. Had he gone soft? Had he... Ding dong! He stepped to the entrance and opened the door, mustering the friendly demeanor he had seen in the popular films. "Hello, Mary, and you must be Thomas. Please, step inside." He ushered the two of them inside the home. He had made sure the house was well lit, and he had gone through the trouble to put out some wine and horns d'avoine. After all, the characters can play their part if the stage isn't set. "What's this about?" Thomas asked gruffly. Winston frowned at the horrible demeanor he displayed in return. In his day, it may have been enough to have a man socially humiliated. "Business proposition," Winston said, putting back on the mask of civility. "I've heard you run a tight ship. I need a man like you, and as you can see, money is no issue." "Why didn't you have the bitch just tell me that?" Thomas snarled. "Could have saved her a lot of trouble, not to mention a black eye." "Water under the bridge," Winston said, his mind already racing at the thought of what comes next. "She'll live. A moment if you would, but please help yourself to the wine. We'll have much to discuss." Thomas went over to the table and sat down, facing away from the door. Winston turned and ushered Mary to the side. "Sorry about the troubles, dear. Hadn't expected the brutes would get violent at so slight a provocation."
That's not the issue, Winston. I'm used to that, but something isn't right here.
she said uncomfortably.
What are you planning?
Winston said, disappointed. "Remember, no questions." His face showing no emotion, he placed $300 in her hand. "Go ahead to my hotel, Mary. Wait for me there. Do not come back here, or the deal is off."
Please, just tell me what's going on and then I'll leave. What's going to happen? Please, I need to know, just for my own sake. I won't even tell anyone. I swear.
For the first time, she saw the anger in his eyes. He had given her more money than she has seen in years, and she hasn't even acknowledged it. "You will leave now, and you will not return. You will do as you are told, and that is the end of it," Winston said. Despite his eyes, Mary noticed that his voice barely wavered. "You don't need to care about him. He just hit you, Mary. Forget it and go."
Please!
She cried out quietly. She had begun to panic. She needed to know what she might be responsible for. It weighed on her conscience. She needed to know. Winston smiled over at Thomas, who had begun to look at them. "Just throw the bitch out and hurry up. I don't got all night," Thomas yelled across the room. "Leave now," Winston whispered to her in a hushed growl, grabbing her arm in his vice-like grip.
Fine, fine,
Mary cried out. As she walked away, her gut feeling continued to ring out. She couldn't let this go. Winston kept an eye on Mary until she was well out of sight. He chuckled to himself. Finally, he could begin. Sorry for the trouble, Thomas. You of all people know how women can be. Winston made his way over the table, carefully ensuring he remained behind Thomas at all times. It's alright. I have to teach that bitch a lesson. Thomas wasn't able to finish the sentence before Winston had set upon him. The last thing he saw was his own blood spraying all over the wooden table, spreading out in so many little pools. Winston liked to use a knife on his food. Biting someone on the neck was risky. It left evidence that was out of the ordinary. But a knife? A knife could have been anyone, for any reason. Besides, the blood tasted the same from a fountain as it did from the tap. He drank to his heart's content. As always, he stabbed Thomas a few more times in the heart, just to be sure. Killed two birds with one stone. Not only was it less risky, but had the upside of looking very personal, despite being anything but. The cleanups was always the worst part of the meal. Winston would need to bathe and then get dressed. He hated bathing outside his own home. It always left him feel rather vulnerable and quite literally naked. He began making his way to the stairs. He heard it. Just a small sound. One that he couldn't afford to ignore. Winston moved silently around into the kitchen that looked into the dining room. He saw Mary there, in the bright kitchen lights, a look of horror on her face. She was trying and failing rather miserably to muffle her cries. Mary, 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 I told you not to come back. She just looked at him, his blood-soaked visage, seemingly more than she could bear.
Why?
Was all she could seem to stammer out. I was hungry, and no one will miss him. The best meals are the ones that don't cause any upset later on. He'll smile at her, and she could finally see him as he truly was. The horrible thing that lurked below the surface. He stood perfectly still, eyes shining brightly. He looked at her in the way a lion might look at a gazelle in the savannah. You play your part well, Mary. Well, until now. All you had to do was obey. I would have kept my word. Now though, now. He trailed off.
Hungry? What, are you gonna eat me too?
She cried. I'm rather full just now. Don't think I'll be eating you. That's what makes this a little pathetic, Mary. At least if I ate from you, your death will mean something. Now, it's meaningless. You'll be forgotten, even by me. Once your kids die, no one will ever even know you existed. It's a little sad, Mary. He said, mocking at drying a tear.
What are you?
She shrieked. I don't know. I've only ever met one other like me, and he didn't stick around to explain what he'd done. Perhaps we're just very rare. A priest told me once that I am the devil, but I think that's unlikely. He stood unblinking. His face told the story. This was fun.
Please, let me go. Please, I have kids. I need to be with them.
Come now, Mary. Really? This song and dance is so old. Every mother says the same thing. He leaped at her, and at once the knife plunged into her heart. She hadn't even had the chance to react. She went without much struggle. He laid her on the floor, knife still in her chest. Now that you're here, may as well have a little fun with you. he laughed to himself. It was one of his little joys in life, playing with his food. He loved to arrange them in all sorts of unusual ways. He dragged Mary into the room with Thomas and in one fell swoop took Thomas' head clean off. He sat them in dining chairs at opposite ends of the table and placed Thomas' head on the silver serving tray at the center of the table. He stepped back and admired his handiwork. He wondered to himself how long it'd take the police to figure out what happened. How confused they'd be by this grisly display. He stepped away and went to shower. He washed himself thoroughly, placing his bloody clothes into a paper bag. He changed into the wonderfully simple brown wool suit that he loved so. Out of date though, it had been for nearly half a century. He still loved it dearly. As he walked downstairs, he spared one last look at the bodies that lay on the floor. What a waste, he thought. He wondered if people felt the same when throwing out a nice steak that had gone bad. A real pity about Mary. He took his car and parked it at the hotel. Tomorrow evening, after the sun went down, he will take a bus to the next city. It'd only take a few hours to get there, and it was time to start again. He wondered who he would be this time. Winston Barrymore, having outlived his usefulness. He strained to remember his real name. It had been so many names ago that he could no longer be sure of which was the original. In the end, it didn't matter much at all. He thought again about the police. They were sure to be shocked by his savagery, and would certainly be looking in every nook and cranny for the one responsible. He will be long gone by then. It had been a bit of fun, but fun never lasts. He had to turn the page. Something new awaited. Something new always awaited. For an eternity. Well, folks, what a story. I never expected this to happen on this story. Well, folks, thank you for stopping by and hearing this story. If you like the story, leave a like and a comment. If you want to hear more stories, go ahead and subscribe. I will leave a link for my Twitter down on the description. And as always, I see y'all on the wasteland.